Ben Dunks, as much as he's a legend, he's also part of the M.A.N culture team now, came in quite late but brought so much to the team. So without further introduction, I'll invite to the stage Ben Dunks.
Good morning. Before I begin, I'd actually really love to take a panoramic photo of you all, if you're happy with that. So you can smile or scowl or whatever you like. I'm going to do that in front.
I feel pretty short.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm Ben Dunks. Today I'm going to talk to you about intimacy and sex and male violence towards women and girls. But I'm going to focus on young men. The future of intimacy and sex, if you like. The fact that we're continuing to see significant cases of sexual assault perpetrated by some of our young men on our young women. And what we're doing to tackle this situation is kind of continuing to fail all of our young people. I'm going to offer you some ideas for some solutions. Before I start, a little brief overview of my history. Most of my working life, I've been in the arts, mostly working in dance. I was a professional dancer for 12 years, trained in Australia. I am an Aussie, so your first two speakers today are foreigners, which is great. I danced in dance companies in Australia and then moved over here to pursue new creative opportunities, which I did. I worked with fantastic companies and choreographers here, worked in some theatre and some opera along the way. So once I stopped performing, I began to work a great deal across education, a lot in primary schools, and then began training elite dancers in the region. Did a significant amount of lecturing at lots of universities, working with dance and theatre, education and medicine. I was also the director of Attic Dance, which is an Arts Council national portfolio organisation here in Plymouth with a full focus on dance in the community. So all of these experiences basically meant that I devised, wrote, delivered workshops and programmes for about 80,000 participants over the space of about the last 15 years. Most of them were young people, with a strong focus on young men and boys. So my understanding of what's happening with sex, intimacy and assault in our young men started about 5 years ago. I was running a dance company at Dartington. It was a creative movement focused company with 13 to 18-year-olds. And after working together for a couple of years, I overheard some of the older girls talking about some of their friends' intimate lives. And their friends' boyfriends were demanding that they do things that they didn't want to do. So I questioned the girls about this. And they informed me that this was now considered normal in relationships, that boys would demand they do things they didn't want to do, or in the middle of an intimate encounter, would suddenly do something that they had not consented to. Now, I left that conversation quite disturbed by what I'd heard, obviously, but also kind of feeling really stupid that I hadn't heard about this happening before, considering my extensive experience working with young people. So I've read about young men being challenging in relationships, but I'd only really read the headlines, because I just assumed this was the press pushing that deficit model of young men on us. Essentially, the fact that everything you read about or hear about young men anywhere in the media is negative, and anything that they do is their fault and has nothing to do with the systems within which they live. So I got home and I started searching about the situation, and the reality of it began to hit me. And before I go on, we're going to have a poll. Now, we've had a little bit of a conversation about statistics and data, had lots of them this morning. There is so much information out there and data out there. I've just picked a couple to start with. It's on your poll. Jump on your code or on your browser that you've already opened and have a look. And answer those three questions. First one, according to March 2021 report by UN Women UK, what percentage of 18 to 24-year-old women have been sexually harassed? And we should be seeing up on the screen your answers coming in. Yeah, so if you look up on the screen, you'll just start to see answers as you bring them in. And as numbers get bigger, that's more people picking that number. Just if you want to know what that means. Answer all three. Yeah, and I'll just slide through them. Sorry, should have been clear with that. Answer all three questions, and then we'll slide through them in a second. 85, 70, or 80. Studious silence. Answers still coming in. 87. 5. Yeah, whole range. Cool. Let's jump to the answer, which is 97%. Next question is, according to the WHO Violence Against Women Prevalence Estimates Report from 2018, percentage of married partnered women aged 15 or over and subjected to physical and or sexual violence from current or former husband or male intimate partner at least once in their lifetime. These are all of your answers. And let's have a look at the answer, which is, moving on, not 97, 26%. And then the third question, according to the same report, what percentage of married or partnered 15 to 19-year-old girls and women have been subjected to physical and or sexual violence from an intimate partner at least once in their lifetime? These are all your answers so far, and the answer is 24%. So, moving back on. So sexual assault is being perpetrated by some of our young men on our young women. Now, after spending a considerable amount of time studying all of this about it, subsequently working with hundreds of young people across Devon and Plymouth, I've come to a couple of conclusions, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Some of them you may agree with, and some of them you may not. My first conclusion was that our young men have been abandoned and are being left to fend for themselves in a world that they are not equipped to deal with. This conclusion resulted in quite an undertaking where I decided to write a book called Intimacy, a guide for young men about sex. So I think our boys are being completely let down by society. They're being relentlessly shamed for watching porn, for just being boys, but subsequently being accused of demonstrating toxically masculine behaviour, and for being sexual predators in waiting. When it comes to sex and intimacy, this abandonment and shaming is having very dangerous consequences. As I say this, I also want to be really clear that what I'm talking about isn't excusing the behaviour of boys and young men, or suggesting that they shouldn't be responsible for their actions. So I'm going to take you through a couple of major elements of boys' lives, and how these elements are failing them, and as a consequence are massively failing girls. I'm also going to give you some solutions I think are achievable, and we can change this situation for the betterment of everyone. This is from Ofsted Report 2021. You can see that I've stolen it from the BBC website. Harmful sexual behaviours happening a lot among children. Percentage of girls and boys who said these types of behaviour happens a lot or sometimes at school. I won't go through that. You can have a look at that. That's going to be up there for a minute. So one of the best outcomes of releasing my book into the world has been that schools and colleges have begun inviting me in to work with them. They invite me in the hope that I can do something about the misogynistic and sexist behaviours, including sexual harassment, happening in the school on a daily basis. Now, as I alluded to earlier, working in schools isn't new to me. Been always running consultation and change programs. Been doing it for 20 years, and with 10 of that as governor of 2 schools. So now the schools I've been working in are prominent secondary and colleges in Devon and Plymouth, and the sad reality is they aren't unique. They are unique for acknowledging the extent of the problem they have, and then bringing me in to work with them to try and solve it. But the problem isn't uniquely theirs. It's happening in every secondary school across the country. It's happening in Australia. It's happening all across the US. And in one of the schools I was in, there's an A-level lad who's European, moved over here when he was at the start of year 11. And he was very clear, it's happening across the country he came from. So I also want to be really clear that what I'm about to talk about isn't an attack on schools and teachers. I think teachers are superheroes. I really think teachers are superheroes. And they're doing an incredible job, an extraordinarily stressful environment. And in that, to then begin to try and deal with this sexism and misogyny is almost impossible. Now the colleges and schools are bringing me in to engage with the boys, because it's the boys' behaviour really that's the problem. Yet the boys' behaviour isn't the problem, really. And only talking to the boys about their behaviour isn't going to fix it. If it did, then that kind of behaviour I'm talking about would have stopped. It hasn't stopped, because what we're doing doesn't work. So let's talk through what happens in schools, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. You've got boys, usually in gangs. It's a very rare lad who will commit sexual harassment by himself. So you've got boys in groups or gangs, and I'm also very aware that using the term gang has its own connotations. Targeting girls in corridors, sometimes in class, sometimes before school, in the grounds, after school, but mostly when there are no teachers present, or if it's in the classroom, when the teacher is completely distracted. Then what happens when the girls report this behaviour to the teachers, and the teachers then have a choice? The timing of these assaults is crucial, usually between lessons, so that any teacher who's been reported to has to make a decision. Do I pursue these lads and leave a classroom full of pupils unattended? Do I even know them? Are they so quick I won't be able to catch them? Are they 6'3", I'm 5'2", and they're seriously physically intimidating? So more often than not, because of the challenges of engaging with this perpetrator, the teacher's response to this appalling behaviour is one of, boys will be boys, just ignore them. Or, what were you doing that made them say what they did? Or, I don't really think it was as bad as you're saying it was. And the boys know this is happening. They're cunning, and they know that time pressure on teachers is tight. They won't be pursued, and that not every teacher in the school knows who they are. And when it comes down to a he said, she situation, she said situation, the girls have no footage of the incident, and the boys' mates will back him up. Now, I've got some quotes from some of these pupils. I'm going to read them out, if I can just move this, just in case you can't see it. So this is a Year 12 girl from Devon. I just feel like issues don't go anywhere, and it backfires on you because of snitching and dobbing people in, and you don't get anything from it. At the end of the day, you just look stupid because nothing happens. It's just a waste of time. I personally, from experience here with telling teachers stuff, nothing comes from it. I'd rather save my time and just deal with it myself, which is a bit annoying. And when I asked her what dealing with it myself means, she said, well, nothing, because actually, I can't do anything. So, these are verbatim from the work I've been doing in schools. So this state of affairs has now resulted in a very challenging situation where girls are no longer reporting what's happening. They're fed up with nothing happening to the boys who are instigating these situations. They've often been in the position where a boy has said something. They've verbally retaliated in most colourful ways. A teacher has heard that retaliation and then has told them to apologise to these boys for talking to them like that. This is devastating. And all these experiences have led to them having no trust in the system and for halting all reporting. So when I do staff training about these situations, I have staff members, primarily male staff members, who basically say that before my training they didn't think the problem existed in their school. And in fact, one of the members of the SLT who I was working with in presenting to the rest of the SLT what I was doing, had the deputy head say, we don't need that. That kind of thing doesn't happen in our school. So when I go into schools, I do a number of things, and all of this is under the frame of culture change. We've already had a bit of a conversation about that this morning. So I start with a consultation process with the Year 12s, usually an hour and a half with 12 boys, then 12 girls, or if it's a mixed group, about 15. We go through a detailed process of evaluating the current culture, and then there are various steps to exploring change and positive outcomes. And one of the extraordinary things that happens every time I conduct these initial conversations is it feels like I've opened the floodgates for both the boys and the girls. I feel truly privileged to have these conversations about culture, misogyny, sexism, harassment, cancel culture, not being heard, not being listened to, being afraid of the opposite sex, being afraid of their own sex, being in a kind of bind of porn-influenced sexual experiences versus wanting deeply intimate experiences with their partner. The biggest takeaway from these sessions is we're not listening to our young people. With all that they're experiencing with the world and with the internet and with porn, we're just not listening. If we do listen, and it's with them that the solutions lie. Now, our young people are having a life we can't imagine. So it's no wonder solutions from adults aren't working. We're trying to provide solutions to a universe we don't understand, and we will never understand. So we need to listen to our young people for guidance on the solution. And from this initial session, I take away their solutions to the problem they are experiencing. And these are their solutions responding to the culture in that institution. And while each educational establishment is facing the same challenges, each has different cultures that requires different solutions. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. I then run training sessions for teachers, an evening parent session, and we'll do workshops for the entirety of Year 12 or whichever year group they want me to work with. My general takeaway is this. Schools are the environment where our young people are spending between 7 and 8 hours, 5 days a week. They are, for the most part, closed environments within which a particular set of expectations, behaviours and actions occur that define the culture of that institution. This next slide, some of you will know what this is, some of you won't. This is gender-based violence continuum. This is from an organisation called Bold Voices. And you'll see it's a pyramid. Right at the top are the most egregious acts, and at the bottom are comments that objectify women and girls, slut-shaming, sexist slurs, and you can see how it builds to those most egregious acts at the top. There are lots of these out there, lots of variations of these. If you haven't seen them before, have a look online, lots of you to check it out. So you see throughout this continuum is the sexist and misogynistic behaviour boys are exhibiting in schools. So, for those of you who haven't seen this, sorry, just something else I've forgotten. It's the bottom is the beginning of the top, just in case you haven't. So these are the beginnings of where we get to eventually. So, throughout the continuum is the sexist and misogynistic behaviour boys are exhibiting in schools, behaviour that is, for the most part, not being addressed by the lectures and assemblies and PSAT lessons and conversations about consent. Current solutions aren't working, which means that our schools are hothouses for the practice and development of the fundamental conditions upon which sexual assault is built. Now that's quite a controversial statement, I'm aware of that, and I'm not saying schools aren't trying. I'm not saying education leaders don't want to deal with this. However, it's really clear by now that none of what we've been doing has worked or is working, and we need a different solution. And that solution doesn't involve just telling boys they're bad, either. So here's another one. Feels like blokes are guilty for whatever it is before it's even happened. So there's a Year 12 boy in Devon. So the second a teacher comes up to you to ask why you weren't in a lesson, it's as if you were truanting. Why weren't you in my lesson? I'm going to give you a detention. You're going to get a punishment if you don't give me a good answer. And you're like, I was in a meeting. What was it about? Actually, I don't want to discuss that with you. It was a meeting I don't want you to know, and that's why I haven't spoken to you about it. Kind of just the assumption that we're in the wrong. So this change has to be cultural, which means fundamental changes across the entirety of the school and supported by parents. And that cultural change has to be led by the pupils, and their solutions are pretty simple. For all the adults, listen to what your young people are telling you. Listen to the girls when they're telling you they're being victims of harassment. Listen to boys and support them in finding a way through the wider culture that tells them they're bad. For the teachers, take action on what's being told to you by girls. Listen, engage with it, do something about it. And follow up with the girls about the action being taken. In particular, male members of staff need to be challenging the behaviour of the male members of the population. Listen to boys when they ask for your help. Don't assume every boy is somehow a troublemaker. Listen to boys when they're telling you about other boys who are harassing girls. For the girls, report everything that happens to you. If necessary, overwhelm the staff with the reality of what is happening so they take you seriously. In particular, report these situations to the male members of staff and demand from them to know what has happened as a consequence. And for the boys, challenge the poor behaviour of your fellow classmates. Challenge your own behaviour towards others. If one of your friends exhibits this kind of behaviour, challenge them. If they don't change, find new friends. For fear of getting into the not all men statement, the vast majority of boys can't bear how a small percentage of the population talks to and treats girls. But the stigma of grasping on others is rife throughout schools. The phrase snitches get stitches is still used, with several lads telling me quite graphic stories of what happened to them when they reported poor behaviour. And this attitude of not grasping on classmates is sometimes supported by male teachers, who, instead of doing something about it, berate the pupil doing the reporting. All the students know who the primary perpetrators are. Female students have been trying to report these boys for years with no impact, and the boys know who they are, but snitches get stitches. Now, if the main culprits are dealt with through a cultural change, then those who haven't yet started, but are beginning to be emboldened to try, won't, and we can stop the perpetual cycle of it. And then the fear of becoming socially excluded for reporting poor behaviour is the final challenge. In conversations with boys, this is the biggest fear, and none of them can consciously explain why they are letting sexual harassment and sometimes assault go unreported, and that keeping social status is more important than stopping harassment. This is one of the biggest elements of behaviour the girls don't understand, that boys choose friends who harass over stopping it happening. Another one for you. From a girl in Devon, the boys don't listen, especially not when they're with their friends. They put on this front because, I don't know about the other girls, but I find it so much like talking to a boy. When he's on his own, he's so different to talking to them when they're in a group, because they actually come across like a cultured person. When they're in a group, they almost come across as like this feral-like animal. So if we begin with an entire school changing the way it deals with this type of behaviour, starting with listening to the young people when they talk about this, what's happening to them, alongside empowering all the boys to challenge protagonists, then there'll be less for the girls to challenge. But if they still need to, they need to be empowered to do so, with consequences for these behaviours from boys being far more significant than they currently are. Then we can begin to build a culture where when these boys start engaging in intimate acts with their girlfriends, they won't have years of building sexually predatory behaviours to fall back on. Okay, so now we've solved the school challenge. Let's talk about porn, universes, and conversations. So I alluded to this previously. Our young people are living in a different universe to us. And by us, I mean us. All the adults who are responsible, all the adults. The environment of their teenage years is so profoundly different to ours. I don't think adults can even begin to understand what they're going through. Even my 29-year-old son sees young people as a completely different species. Our teenage environment wasn't so removed from our parents that they could relate to what we were going through well enough to be able to understand and engage with it with some knowledge. With our young people growing up with access to the internet and all that entails, they are in a different universe. I'm going to come back to the impact of us adults on this different universe idea, but first let's talk about porn. And we have another poll, so jump on that QR code. Here we are. How old were you when you saw your first porn film? There isn't an answer to this one, this is just a curious question. (16, 14, 13, 26, 30, 12. Well, so I didn't put that one down there. I made the assumption. I made the assumption that everybody has. So apologies for my assumption. 70. Okay, I was 21. And then I didn't see another one for another 5 years, I think, 5 or 6 years. So, second question. According to a US poll by Common Sense Media in 2022, what percentage of children aged 13 and under have seen online porn? 50, 60, 90, 70, 75, 80, 89. Okay, the answer is 54%. And then the last question, according to a 2010 study by Anna Bridges et al., what percentage of scenes contained at least one aggressive act, looking at both physical and verbal aggression? 100, 80, 90, 60. What's the numbers there? And the answer is 90%. And that's an old study, but I'm sure somebody has a more recent study than that, but that's the only one I could find. So there are numerous consequences to this access our young people have. And I think one of the frightening elements is we really have no idea of the long-term consequences of this long-term access to hardcore porn. Culture Reframe, which is a research-driven, health-based non-profit organisation in the States, defines pornography as the public health crisis of the digital age. So what's the outcome of a puberty and adolescence spent watching porn? Before we get to that, I want to just talk you through a really simple image of what's happening to them versus our own journeys with porn. This is a really super crude diagram that I've put together that kind of if people haven't really thought about it, it kind of makes you think about it. This should be... Sorry, this isn't just stopped working. Oh, there we go. Here we are. So us, over 30s but primarily over 40s. Again, I'm talking about us. So when we hit the beginning of puberty, we started talking to people we fancied. In terms of we're talking about relationships here. We developed through puberty into adolescence, started to have relationships, maybe started snogging each other. We hit mid to late teens, emotional intimate relationships got more serious, and then as we got into our mid to late teens, we started to explore sex with our partners. We had little to no knowledge, maybe it was later, of what actually goes on. Amongst the fun was a serious amount of fumbling. So this is them, our young people up to the age of around 22. Before they hit puberty, or as they hit puberty, they're exposed to hardcore porn. It's not necessarily watching it themselves. It might just be that they hear it from other young people and classmates. They hit puberty, they watch more porn, and begin to start talking to others they fancy. They develop through puberty into adolescence. They start to have relationships, maybe kissing, but the expectation of sex and pornified sex is there. They hit mid to late teens, emotional, intimate relationships get more serious, like we did at that same stage, but the pressure of sex and porn-focused sexual experiences are incredibly strong. Sex is explored, and the pressure of 6+ years of learning, expected performance and dominance from porn leads to assault. So our boys, and this exposure to porn massively impacts girls as well, but today I'm talking about boys. Our boys are watching hardcore porn often before they begin the process of exploring girlfriends, boyfriend relationships as part of puberty. Then when they begin to develop these relationships, the way they're engaging in these relationships has behaviours in it that are a consequence of this early immersion. Another quote, coming backwards and forwards with this microphone, from a girl. The first time you come across a boy, you'll hear comments. The first thing they say about you is something to do with your body. They don't, a lot of the time. They just don't see you as a person. They see you almost as an object, and I think that comes from things like porn. They see that it's something that they can use to their advantage rather than a natural person who's worth getting to know, who's worth having as a friend, and I think we'd look with respect and stuff. Told you it was verbatim. So our boys have been watching porn for years, and the porn's been teaching them some lessons about sex. Sex doesn't have any intimacy, that's brutal, mostly aggressive, mostly including physical assault, and the women are submissive and do what men tell them to do, and sex happens when men want it. The other major narrative surrounding boys, and one's defining them far more than most adults realise, is shame. They're being shamed for watching the porn that is online there for them to access. They're being shamed for being male, with the assumption that they're all sexual predators in waiting. Their behaviour is toxic because they're young men, and that everything they do is bad because they're boys. I also think they're receiving the backlash of years of male privilege, or what my friend Reverend Adam Dyer calls the death of privilege. So we have a society that says, shame on you for watching porn, shame on you for being a boy, shame on you for being masculine, shame on you for all your future predation. It's pretty heavy stuff for an adolescent boy to deal with. And one of the things about shaming boys for watching porn is that no one's doing anything about the fact that the porn is there and freely available. We're asking our young people to stop watching porn. So essentially, they're being told to exercise puberty and adolescent willpower against the might of the most powerful behaviour-changing tools in history. That's really going to work. I've had responses to this reality from adults that run along the lines of, well, I had self-control when I was 15, why can't they? You weren't growing up under the influence of algorithms as dopamine control systems that infect and manipulate a significant element of your life and are causing changes in behaviour that we have no long-term understanding of their consequence. All of this is pushing these young people into more and more watching and consuming. And let's be realistic about porn as well. It's always going to be there. There isn't the political will anywhere to ban it, and considering the amount of money they make, they can just fund lobbyist after lobbyist to ensure the status quo is maintained. And years of watching porn does not make a skilled partner. So our boys are in an intimate encounter, might be their first. They have the weight of expectation on them that they should know what they're doing. They've been watching all the self-proclaimed experts online. They'll think they have to last for hours and make their partner orgasm hundreds of times. But they don't know what they're doing. And they aren't going to say they don't know what they're doing, because they're taught that that means you're a loser. And tomorrow everyone will know that you don't know what you're doing. And you get shamed and you get cancelled. So what do? Well, one of the things that happens when we feel shame, and in particular happens when we're embarrassed, and shame because we don't know what we're doing, is that we double down on what we're already doing. So they double down and they emulate porn. They do what they've seen as this is the only thing they know. So they assault by default. And when it comes to shame versus learning about consent, the shame of watching porn, the shame of not knowing what you're doing, resulting in porn emulation and assault, well, the intense feelings of shame in those moments will mostly override lessons that they might have had in school. So instead of telling them to stop watching porn and keep shaming them for doing so, well, aren't we giving them a different path to follow when it comes to intimacy and sex? This impact of porn, this single pathway to what sex and intimacy can be, this is kind of why I wrote my book, to give boys and young men a different pathway to intimacy that isn't assault by default. The central message of my book is that if you focus on your partner's pleasure, you won't assault her, and you'll both have a very excellent time. And so how do we change this? Well, we also stop shaming them. We also stop assuming that they're sexual predators in waiting. We stop the shame in admitting you don't know what you're doing. We give them a guide by which they have another pathway to their intimate lives. And we train them in sort of 3 specific areas that there isn't really enough focus on. We train them in empathy. We train them in accountability, but not just taking responsibility for their actions, but for understanding the accountability that they have in their role in relationships. And we train them in how they say they don't know what they're doing and understanding all that that means. Frankly, if we had more male role models consistently demonstrating these 3 traits, then there'd be a significant part of the job started. These 3 areas they need specific training in will guide them in their relationships and will guide them through the spectre of cancel culture and the subsequent fear of getting it wrong. Or the potential consequences of making a mistake, saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Now, over the course of their adolescent lives, young men have been seeing a variety of different ways cancellation has been happening to people in the media and in their school environments. And it's important to distinguish between the different environments and the different impacts that these are having, because they impact the subsequent behaviour of our young men. They've watched sexual predators like Harvey Weinstein get put away, but he still has access to his millions. They've also watched Donald Trump be immune from prosecution for alleged sex crimes. They've seen Andrew Tate be charged and held. Sorry, I had to mention that name. But they've also seen others spouting similar material not be touched. Closer to home, they'll have experiences of boys in their own school or will have heard about boys from other schools who've been sexual predators and haven't been charged. And then we'll have seen girls who've been shared intimate photos with a boyfriend be completely ostracised by an entire year group or school when that boyfriend has then shared those photos with his mates. And the boyfriend does this with impunity. Finally, he will also have experienced moments in his own classroom or even with friends within schools, where as part of a discussion about important topics, he or one of his friends may ask a question or throw out an idea he's read about or heard others say, and the result of this will be essentially being cancelled within his own school environment. So it's all very confusing for these boys. How do you navigate this? And then how do you come to an understanding of how you fit into this? How can you take difficult topics that are swirling around your head that you might have heard others discussing, but you're not sure of, and you know cause consternation in some, downright outrage in others, but you don't understand why? How can you come to conclusions about these challenging ideas without discussion with others? How do you know what pisses others off if you can't speak about them for fear of cancellation? None of what I've just said is about excusing deliberately aggressive, sexist or misogynistic attitudes, statements or attacks. These are actually done by a small minority of pupils. What I'm talking about is the rest of the population of boys who are trying to get it right and who want to get it right, but are finding themselves in a landscape where exploring what is right or not has consequences, but where it's also random as to whether you'll be cancelled or not. So all we're talking about today is having a massive impact on young people in their relationships. More and more young women are choosing not to have relationships for fear of being assaulted, and more young men are choosing not to have relationships for fear of being accused of assault. Now the final element I'm going to talk about today is the taboo of talking about sex. And we have our final poll. Hooray! We have 3 questions. They're yes, no. Relevant adults. Parents, yeah. I normally say relevant adults just because, for some parents aren't they relevant adults.
Could you just clarify what you mean by being cancelled? Because I see it as being ignored, or we say sent to Coventry when somebody doesn't speak to you anymore. Or
Can I come back to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Did you have the sex conversation with your relevant adults? It's just the sex conversation. The sex conversation. Whichever it might be before, it might be after. Yes, yeah, hopefully not during. Maybe that should have been a fourth question. Yeah. Who got busted? Okay, sex, so that's 64% of you said no, 36% of you said yes. Second question, of those of you who did, who remembers the sex conversation with their parents? 35% of you did, 65% of you didn't. And then for the third one, of those of you who didn't, who wishes they had had one? 63% of you wish that you'd had, 37% of you sound like you're really glad you didn't. Also probably really glad that you didn't have it in the middle. Okay, so we don't talk about sex for a whole bunch of reasons. This is either with family, between friends, or between partners. It's embarrassing. We might say the wrong thing. Might have to talk about your feelings. You talk about your feelings and be vulnerable, you might be laughed at. And if what you've said is shared, then everyone might judge you. What if you ask a question that others think is a stupid question and you get laughed at? Being laughed at and the shame is a massive part of this. And if I'm a younger person, my question might reveal that A, I don't know anything, and B, I'm a virgin. So another one of these, let's say, bath. There we go, no, next one. Another one of these conversations. Year 12 boy. For parents not to make sex a negative thing, instead ensure they're safe, because kids will have sex, people have had sex, whether they want you to or not, so they should just instead make sure you're doing it in a safe way. Year 12 boy. So sitting alongside the taboo element of talking about sex is what I mentioned before, that we're living in different universes. The universe our young people are living in is completely alien to us. And if we think that we might have somehow got a grip on it, the online world moves so fast, we very quickly move back to having no understanding. So we have these two really powerful elements working against us when it comes to having open and frank conversations about sex. First is the cultural difficulty of talking about it, and second is we have no understanding of what our young people are going through, so no understanding of where we can begin the conversation. And then access to 24-hour porn just adds a whole new set of restrictions on this. Now, not only do we feel embarrassed about talking about it, but we don't know where to begin, because we don't understand their lives, but also have the looming spectre of all the different sex acts that they've watched. The hardcore nature of it, the violence of it, the sheer volume of it. And this brings with it a very real fear about these conversations. Is what they're going to tell me going to make me really angry with them for watching this? Am I going to feel like a failed parent because I somehow let them experience this stuff? Are they going to use a term or talk about a particular sex act that I know nothing about? Are they going to realise that they have more knowledge of sex than me? You understand? So let's get to teachers and sex education conversations in schools. Who would want to be a teacher navigating an sex education curriculum being taught to a porned up group of teenagers? Any of you? I mean, I think they're doing an extraordinary job. They're an amazing job. Particularly because in all my conversations with young people, the scorn they have for their sex education content is extraordinary. And what's even more extraordinary is how they feel sorry for some of their teachers for what's clearly incredible discomfort in talking about sex. Some teachers are very comfortable with it, and others accelerate through whatever material they have as fast as they can. These teachers also have a huge fear about saying something that someone considers to be the wrong, but they don't. They're then reported, have their name splashed all over some vile newspapers, lose their job, become unemployable. Another one. For the teachers, it's like to show the human side more with the discussion, because at the end of the day, we're all human, and actually I think a lot of us would benefit if we went, have you got any experiences of this? And actually they went, oh yeah, this is what happened to me, rather than going, well, from a professional point of view, I think that this would be the best solution. You're like, yeah. It's the human side with that connection of the, maybe it's that, not even that I'm asking for advice, I just want to know that I'm not alone in this situation kind of thing. So we've a generation of teenagers who have more visual knowledge of sex and the many differing ways it can be experienced than a lot of their relevant adults. And those adults are more and more frightened of talking with them about sex than ever before. So in my numerous conversations with young people over the last year, they've known how cringy it is to talk about sex. They see what's happening to adults when they try to broach the subject, but they desperately want us to try harder. They want these conversations. They need these conversations. So what they're saying to us is, please talk about sex. Please keep trying if we bounce you the first time around. Please don't dive into these conversations with super heavy ideas straight away. We have to work our way into the heavy stuff. And while they don't want the explicit details of your sexual experiences, what they do want is an understanding that we might have experienced what they're experiencing. And we might have some words of wisdom, or just reassurance that they're not weirdos or broken or a social pariah. They also just might want us to listen as they talk about what they've seen, their fears, their worries, and maybe we just need to be a sounding post. And our young people want the frank conversations to happen sooner. Yes, there is the reality that talking about sex is a big challenge when children are under 16 and they're not yours. That's why I framed my book for 16 to 22-year-old young men. Our young people are being exposed to the power of porn from a much earlier age than 16. And they need these frank conversations when they're witnessing this stuff. Leave it to 16 and they'll have had years of watching with no counter information. Last quote, longer one, year 12 boy. I felt like at year 7 to year 9, teachers wouldn't want to have these sorts of conversations because you know they're only like 11, 12, 13. You know it's not really old enough, but at the same time they're still getting all this information online that's like bad information and misinformation. That like the teachers almost don't have a lot of conversations because if you're like, they're not ready for it. They don't understand. They're a little too young, but they're being exposed to it. It's just all the sort of stuff you wouldn't want them to be exposed to, say on the sort of like, probably like a bit of a warped perception of what's normal and how to access stuff. I love the way they speak. So, in conclusion, what I've been talking about today paints a pretty grim picture of both the current lives of our young people are leading and the future lives the next generations are going to be leading if we don't do something different and soon. I think we can turn this around, but I think it's going to take actions of everyone, not just boys, to do it. Essentially, schools and colleges are mostly unaware of the reality of the sexism and misogyny happening within their walls, mostly due to the non-reporting of incidents by the female students, due to years of being disbelieved and told boys will be boys, and non-reporting boys due to serious concerns about physical harm. This is creating a hothouse of sexist, misogynistic and sometimes sexually harassing behaviour that, if unchecked, is going to have even graver consequences for the future. So porn and a vacuum of realistic and detailed conversations about sex and guidance on other ways of approaching intimate lives are propelling young men into assault by default when in intimate encounters. The conversation of, you know, porn isn't real, isn't enough. Alongside this, there's a fear for them of getting it wrong. Fear of being cancelled for doing and saying the wrong thing. This whole situation is leading to a significant proportion of this generation of young people who are essentially too frightened to engage in relationships for fear of either being assaulted or being accused of doing the assaulting. And when I'm talking about cancelled, just to answer your question, it's a really general term that they're using a lot of the time, which is essentially being ejected socially from everyone. Sorry, not from everyone, sometimes from everyone, mostly ejected from their social group. So there can be layers. Finally, we have us, the responsible adults, scared of talking about something we've been doing our entire lives. Well, some of us have been doing our entire lives. The responsible adults, responsible for the fact that porn isn't being dealt with, responsible for our inaction in getting over our own fears of difficult conversations, in particular the men. We men have been incredibly poor about getting into these conversations. And my solutions? Well, the solution is essentially this. We need behaviour change, not just boys and young men changing behaviour, we all need to adjust our behaviour. Our young men aren't equipped to deal with the onslaught of porn at the age they're seeing it. They're not equipped to deal with what is being delivered to them about sex and intimacy. They're not equipped to stop watching it. They need us adults to start talking about sex openly and transparently. They need us to equip them with empathy, accountability, and being able to admit when we don't know what we're doing. It's partly achieved by watching men around them role modelling these qualities. They need to read my book, Intimacy, to understand there's another path towards sex and intimacy available to them. And if they don't read my book, that detailed conversation about other paths is the conversation that needs to be happening from their relevant adults. We need schools to engage with boys as early as possible and to have a consistent and strong sanction towards sexist, misogynistic and sexually harassing behaviour. Male staff need to lead this. All staff, but especially male staff, need to support reporting from girls that something is happening that needs dealing with. We need parents and staff to be talking from the same place so that messaging is consistent from all directions. Finally, and most importantly, we need to be listening to our young people for solutions to the challenges they're experiencing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. I got told off for handing the microphone around last time, so sorry guys, there's no hands up, but please put them through the Slido. And we will pick up some Q&As at the end, we have the panel as well. A few questions for you, Ben. I'm going to throw them at you. The first one, and it's a shameless plug for you. Where did you get your book from?
It's on Amazon. I'll send you the link that will have all the Vogue stats. We'll send you some links from all of our speakers today, so it'll be on that link.
Lovely. There's quite a few questions there for Ben. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to have some discussions over lunch as well with everyone if they wish to have some personal conversations with him. I'm looking to Rich as well, but there's one question here about, is teacher-led PhD lessons working?
I personally don't think they are. There might be others in schools who do think they are, just because I think that they are too few and far between. And I think this is kind of the centre of why work isn't working in schools, because there isn't the understanding of what is actually happening in schools, because it's not being reported. There hasn't been an escalation of more of this kind of work in schools, because the feeling in my conversations with SLT is that what they're doing is working to some extent. So it just needs to be much deeper than that. It needs to be much bigger than that. It needs to be an entire cultural approach, of which the PSHE lessons are a part of it. But then by themselves, the one-off conversations or assemblies about consent, the one-off conversations about Andrew Tate, like they don't have an impact. So it's not enough. Do you want to answer that too?
Thank you. Yes, so for those that don't know me, I'm part of M.A.N Culture, but I'm also a director of safeguarding for a fairly large multi-academy trust in the southwest. So what Ben has talked about is really important to the schools, to the young people, to the teachers, to the staff, to the senior leaders that I work with. And I would support what Ben has just said there. The teachers are trying to do their very best. We've made strides in what PSHE is about sex and relationships education. So the government, the DFE, has given us a better framework around that. It is now statutory. However, as Ben has said, it's really, really hard if you're a teacher and maybe your main subject is geography or French or maths or English, and you've got on your timetable somewhere, you've got the PSHE, and honestly, I feel for some of those teachers, because they will probably look in their schemes of work and go, oh God, I've got to do sex and relationship education. What does that mean? And the reality is that, we don't train them as well as we should. And actually I have a question there, should they be doing that? Are they the best people to be doing it? And what I would do is actually shamelessly give a plug for the work of NSPCC to put it together for Childhood Project. We've heard a little bit about it in terms of their whole school approach that is happening in the city around the change to healthy relationship education. I put a plug in there for organisations like Beyond Equality, like Progressive Masculinity, experts who are confident in having these conversations, because our children, our young people, deserve something better than what our current generation of teachers can give them. And I stand here as a senior leader. I am a teacher. That's not denigrating my colleagues. That's recognising that if they're going to provide a real answer to what I see on a daily basis as a safeguarding lead, the child-on-child abuse that happens because of the perception that predominantly young men think this is how we go about a physical relationship. If we are going to change that, then I don't think that's a fair ask of people whose professional background is in maths or geography or history. What we need is experts to help them with that, but that needs change at a higher level. If we get political for just a moment, that means changes at a national level in terms of the way schools are funded, so that actually head teachers, and I was a secondary head teacher before I moved into this role, so that head teachers at primary and at secondary level can actually afford to bring in those experts. Because at the moment, my colleagues are crying out for it, but they cannot balance their budgets. So how are they going to do something different? So our poor old teachers, trained to teach geography, French, maths, whatever, get that afternoon slot on a Thursday where they think, oh my goodness, I've got to talk about masturbation. I've got to talk about pornography. What am I going to do when they ask me, what's your experience? We're not, that's not fair. So PSHE, yes, we need it. What we need is it should be funded in a way that the experts can deliver it.